Space Marines, drafted into service from childhood to become gene-wrought soldiers whose sole purpose is the defense of humanity's realm. Organised into forces numbering approximately 1,000 Marines at any one time, well, in most cases anyway, the potential for these powerful beings to commit heinous acts of wanton brutality not aligned with humanity's best interest is curbed by the indoctrination process every Space Marine initiate endures. This is intended to ensure the aspiring Marine stays true to the Imperium's ethos no matter the situation they find themselves in. This should be, by all intents and purposes, quite a foolproof way of ensuring strict loyalty to the Golden Throne. After all, you don't see the greater armed forces of our age deciding to turn renegade, the entire navy calling it quits and sailing off into the sunset. On top of that, psycho-indoctrination doesn't even apply to the run-of-the-mill Western armed forces of our timeline compared to the professional soldiery of the grimdark future. This doesn't, however, account for the interpolitical turmoil of the 41st millennium, the dissimilar and often secretive arms of imperial law threatening Space Marine chapters with excommunication over perceived misdeeds, or the insidious influence both Xenos and Chaos entities can utilise to influence the psyche of the Imperium's transhuman servants. Besides the infamous galaxy-spanning coup known as the Horus Heresy, wherein 9 whole Space Marine legions turned traitor due to the malign influence of the Chaos Gods, there have been many Space Marine chapters who have chosen to relinquish their vows of servitude to the throne in order to pursue other ends. This does not simply mean these chapters have become traitors and so have turned to worshipping chaos, throwing in their lot with those they despised in their former life. Far from it. There are in fact many reasons within the decades worth of lore from Games Workshop and Black Library, wherein we experience motivations and situations for Space Marine chapters to choose this path. No matter the catalyst for these servants of the Emperor to renege their vows, many find a new freedom outside of the religious dogma and rigid codes of conduct practiced within the loyal chapters. There are some of these renegades who relish in the opportunity to exercise the full array of their transhuman abilities against both old foe and erstwhile allies, wading into swirling melees and crushing skulls with their bare hands, relishing in the slow deformation of facial features as these poor unfortunate skulls crack and concave under the pressure of their power-armoured strength. Those travelling this path of lawlessness, who lack a moral code, generally do begin to drift towards the sin of heresy. Often these groups or lone warriors will answer the call of the blood god Khorne and end their days raving mad berserkers, a skull to add to another's tally. Of those who do not quite fall so far, there are Space Marine chapters and battle forces who have thrown off the shackles of Imperial loyalty and now operate as pirates, refusing to swear fealty to any traitor lord or Chaos Legion, and yet are not willing to seek penance from the Imperium. These Marines dwell in the grey lines between loyalty and outright heresy, raiding soft targets for supplies and even recruits when needs arise, questioning their own motivations and actions constantly. And still, there are many more renegade transhumans who seek to forge their own path, driven individuals who form their own moral codes based on the teachings of their home chapter, but tailored to their new lives on the run from Imperial retribution. These groups of Space Marines, or even wholesale chapters, seek to maintain their morality and do their best to safekeep humanity from the ravages of the Xenos and the Heretic, as per their original purpose. Though many a moral dilemma is forced upon these renegades who ultimately just want to be left alone to still serve the Emperor, the question of the Force's future must always be considered. It is not without reason that the most prized resource within the traitor legions themselves is pure, incorrupt gene seed. The ability to implant new recruits to continue the long war is paramount to any warband's survival, and that is no different for renegade chapters. The only exception to this is the few who have resigned themselves to a slow extinction. Not wishing to combat those they once called cousin, let alone to steal their precious gene seed, these more pious renegades are destined for a slow, violent decline in fighting numbers. For those who do not wish to fade away unremembered, what will they do to secure their legacy? And will these actions divert them from a path of righteousness into the clutches of infamy? In this video, we aren't just going to speak about Chaos Space Marines, but rather, I'd more so like to discuss with you the lesser known Space Marine renegades. These could be anywhere from an entire chapter of Marines, a loss of manpower and resources so great it's a huge blow to Imperial influence spanning sectors, or even single Marines, deserters, or those left for dead by their sworn brothers. I'd like to discuss some particular chapters who it is noted have either relinquished their vows to the Imperium and forged their own path, or have become embroiled in some misunderstanding of unfortunate events, condemned by the Imperium through no intended trespass on their part. Before we get started, remember, if you enjoy the videos or learn something new, please consider hitting the subscribe button. In the last month, almost 80% of viewers have not subscribed. Very sad. We're almost at that 1k mark. Let's get into the video. Given it harks back to my childhood, I want to touch on the Relictors first. I remember reading a short story in a White Dwarf back when I was a young teenager of this misled Space Marine chapter and their fall from grace. It really resonated with me, the downfall of loyal Imperial servants who believe they can harness the power of chaos to combat the Pantheon's dark minions. A stark irony that leaves even the most devout and faithful a crazed and paranoid reflection of their erstwhile greatness. In our Inquisition and Eisenhorn videos, we've touched on the dangers and allure of chaos, how insidious the influence of the Dark Pantheon is. Well, the Relictors most certainly are a lesson in this ignorance, however maybe not wholly in the way of some chapters that ultimately fell to the ruinous powers. Let me elaborate. As you could probably tell, the Relictors are a Space Marine chapter since turned renegade due to their willingness to not only utilise chaos artifacts in open battle, but also in their mission to ply the stars collecting them. Just as the Dark Angels chapter are known to redeploy suddenly, leaving their allies in open conflict to give chase to members of the Fallen, the Relictors are known to do the same when an artifact or weapon of the Dark Powers is close to being within their grasp. As with most tales which retell the tragic downfall of the Emperor's Angels of Death, there was an event that occurred within the chapter's history which foreshadowed the Relictors' obsession with warp-crafted weaponry. Now, the various military organisations within the Imperium of Man recognise, through pained experience, the immense threat that space hulks pose. Space hulks, for those not aware, are basically massive floating amalgamations of several voidcraft, asteroids, and any other detritus thought lost in space or the warp itself, all merged together in what can be moon-sized monstrosities capable of warp travel. Given their more or less neutral designation, neither belonging to any faction in particular, species such as orcs, Chaos Space Marine warbands, or cults and gene stealers, to name but a few, can be found prowling the dead halls of powered-down warp-capable ships, which are part of these immense structures. Often these vessels, to use the term loosely, can also be demonically possessed in some way, automatic systems corrupted by warp entities as they drifted unprotected by Gellerfields. Needless to say, the sudden appearance of these craft in Imperial space, containing any number of dire threats, are reacted to swiftly and with extreme prejudice, often by Space Marines. So it was that the Relictors were tasked with clearing the Space Hulk designated Captor of Sin. Once on board, it would become apparent that a sentient Chaos Space Marine cult had indeed claimed the Space Hulk for themselves. Through arduous combat in the tight confines of the Space Hulk, the Relictors' strike force, consisting of First Company Terminators, led by Librarian Decario and assisted by an Inquisitor named Dimash, would defeat the small warband. However, without realising it, in desperation, Decario had picked up the Chaos Warband champion's Demon Blade and used it to defeat the traitor Astartes. This unwitting act would come to lead the entire chapter down the road to damnation in the coming years. Given that this powerful Chaos artifact had ended the combat aboard the Captor of Sin so decisively, the Inquisitor and Librarian Decario were able to influence the chapter itself into seeking out more such artifacts of power, as surely in their hands these could be used to combat the great enemy. Eventually the chapter, still influenced and aided by Inquisitor Dimash, would be confronted by more Puritan Inquisitors who would demand the chapter surrender their tainted artifacts for destruction and the Radical Inquisitor for trial. Though the Relictors would acquiesce to save outright excommunication, they would, in secret, continue to search for forbidden Chaos artifacts and use them openly in battle, even whilst embarking on a 100-year penance for doing just that. Eventually, the Relictors' own actions of using Chaos artifacts to combat both Chaos and Xenos threats, not to mention their sacking of an inquisitorial hold protecting such archaic and damnable pieces, would earn the ire of both the Inquisition and the Grey Knights chapter. The Relictors would be declared excommunicate traitoris by the Ordo Hereticus, and over half the chapter killed in combat by the Inquisition and their allied Grey Knights contingent. We know that a few hundred battle brothers of the Relictors would flee the engagement, knowing they could not stand against the combined will of the Inquisition and the Grey Knights, who were crafted to combat the forces of the demonic, the Relictors' corrupted artifacts not giving them an edge in this conflict. Though they have not appeared officially in canon since the 13th Black Crusade, we do not know whether the Relictors continue their ignorant use of Chaos artifacts to combat the enemies of the Imperium, or whether they have since rescinded their oaths of loyalty to the Golden Throne, viewing the decimation of their chapter as cause to turn away from the Emperor's light. The hypocrisy of this tale, typical of the Inquisition, is that there exists inquisitorial agents and warbands who utilise this very strategy to combat the great enemy, albeit they do not flaunt this openly. Whilst there are those of more hardline Puritan natures within the Inquisition who would like nothing more than to burn these more radical inquisitors for treason, the equilibrium of the Inquisition in its totality is maintained through varied opinions, belief structures and alliances, meaning all radical inquisitors are not just killed on sight. The truth of the matter being very much more convoluted, as we experience in probably the most detail through Dan Abnett's Eisenhorn and Ravenel novel trilogies. You can learn more about the internal workings of the Inquisition in our videos, which I'll link in the description. The Ashen Claws are an exciting and original Renegade chapter whose piratical history began in the years of the Great Crusade, when the 18 Primarchs still toiled under one banner, and they are still present through the ages right into the most recent years of 40k lore, appearing in the Carcharodon's novel Outer Dark. Even though the Space Marine's name persists after near on 10,000 years, they are now little more than reavers of human and Xenos alike. Originally the Ashen Claws' 18th chapter of the Raven Guard Legion, their ranks were almost solely comprised of Terran-born tribesmen who participated in cultural slavery prior to their indoctrination and transformation into the Emperor's Space Marines. In their former lives as Terran tribesmen, they would conduct raids on their fellow countrymen, which consisted of wholesale slaughter and the currency of forced indenture. Unfortunately, these particular recruits to the Emperor's armies would maintain this mindset, resulting in a callous disregard for human freedoms even after their transhuman status. Corvus Corac's abhorrence of slavery would see him never accept the brutal practices of the Terran-born legionaries he'd inherited as Lord of the 19th, and so in a public show of disdain he would consign the chapter, as well as any of his like-minded sons, to crusade among what is now known as the Ghoul Stars. Corac's intent to rid himself of their immoral influence within his legion, whilst ensuring his gene sons would visit imperial retribution to that deathly region of space in the Emperor's name. Though only the Ashen Claws could detail their exploits over the millennia in any kind of detail, what is known is that these pirates would refuse to align themselves with neither imperial or chaos powers. They viewed their treatment by their father as a betrayal and owed no allegiance to a traitor in Horus. The Ashen Claws would instead stay true to themselves, striking out at imperial shipping lanes, frontier worlds, and ill-prepared chaos-aligned fortresses whose supplies could be made use of within their own fleets and armies. By continuing their modus operandi of taking what they required from those they conquered, this practice would see their fleets continuously crewed with slave serfs and their armories adequately supplied for action. The Ashen Claws are traders of flesh and other vital materials which are valued in frontier regions of space. Though it is well known these renegades do trade and barter with the almost equally mysterious Carcharodon's chapter, we can only suppose from the somewhat limited literature we have concerning their recent activities that these marines have grown to become extremely insular and almost fearful of imperial retribution for their past transgressions, though what the future holds for them, none can be certain. Given the turmoil of the current setting, should the Ashen Claws be willing to let go of their pride, it may be possible the Imperium accepts them back into the Loyalist fold. However, it is more likely they will face utter annihilation at the hands of either Chaos, Xenos, or indeed Imperial fleets, should their place of hiding be discovered. During the heresy, were Imperial armed contingents or planetary governors to either side with Horus or choose to remain neutral, the majority of these were consigned to death during the post-heresy era known as the Scouring. Given that the Ashen Claws chose to remain neutral during this conflict and in the millennia since, why an Imperial retribution force has not been dispatched in the time since the heresy until now is unknown. It may, however, have to do with the fact that the Ashen Claws occupy a dreaded area of space that few dare to venture within. The Soul Drinkers are absolute legends within the 40k community, and curiously named as far as Loyalist chapters are concerned. I'll take a quick moment to just state that in this case we are referring to the original Soul Drinkers chapter and not the Primaris founding of recent years. The Soul Drinkers possess one of the most perplexing origin stories as far as Space Marine foundings are concerned. Through deception, betrayal, and the meddling of higher powers, the Soul Drinkers novel series is a must-read for anybody into that old-school, action-packed, firstborn Marine lore. This is your spoiler warning for anybody currently reading those novels or who do not wish them to be spoiled before they can. Now, this is not a Soul Drinkers video, so we don't want to deep dive into all the detailed lore. To do justice to such content would require something similar in length to one of our Primarch rating videos. So we'll do our best to adhere to the core events surrounding the Soul Drinkers' fall to extinction. The plight of the Soul Drinkers chapter, leading to their eventual relegation to renegades and traitors, was owed to a 6,000-year-old plot, orchestrated by followers of that chaos deity known best for such meddling, Sench. The malign influence of the Great Deceiver had infected ancient Astartes of this proud chapter, and through an insidious cult slowly poisoned them from within. Make no mistake though, many of the Soul Drinkers were loyal to the core. It was the deception of the few which brought the Soul Drinkers into ultimate disrepute. Prior to the discovery of this internal treachery, the Soul Drinkers were already walking a fine line of heresy, as they would come to blows with a joint Mechanicus and Ministorum force which had somehow laid claim to what was believed to be an ancient relic of the chapter, gifted to them by their erstwhile primogenitor, Rogel Dawn. I say erstwhile because since their founding, this storied chapter was said to have been founded using the gene seed of the Praetorian of Terror himself. It is discovered just prior to their final fall from grace, however, that the Soul Drinkers' gene seed is of an unknown origin. What this truly means for their Primaris refounding can only be speculated upon for now. Now we know that nobody, friend or foe, betrays the Ministorum and lives to tell the tale. Following this short but bloody exchange, the Ministorum and Mechanicus would paint this skirmish as a betrayal to the Imperium of Man, and subsequently this otherwise loyal chapter would be declared excommunicate traitoris. The following years would see the Soul Drinkers chapter on the run from various Imperial retribution fleets, as well as being plagued by mutation and betrayal within their own ranks, ultimately caused by the undetected influence of its sentient cult. Matters came to a head when the last remaining Soul Drinkers are cornered by their forebears, the Imperial Fists, and ultimately brought to trial. Upon the Phalanx, capital ship of the Fists, and ancient flagship of their Primarch, Rogel Dawn, the hitherto undetected Chaos influence would finally make itself known, in the form of an ancient dreadnought and his follower, none other than the Master of Sanctity himself. Opening a warp gate within the hallowed bowels of the Phalanx, a demon prince of Tsench and hordes of his etheric followers would pour into the Imperial vessel, intent on the murder and feasting of transhuman souls. Through the combined efforts of various Space Marine chapters on board who had travelled to the Phalanx to take part in the Soul Drinkers' trial, as well as the efforts of the Soul Drinkers themselves, the demonic hordes and traitor Marines would be defeated, though at a high cost of lives. Ultimately, only 3 loyal Soul Drinkers and the defeated traitor Ancient remained alive, the heretic torn from his sarcophagus by Chapter Master Sarpedon himself. They would depart the Phalanx, aware that this galaxy was no home for them, stepping through the newly opened warp portal into whatever hell awaited them. There is no further record of their deeds to date. I believe an honourable mention as far as unaligned Renegade Space Marines are concerned is the various fallen Dark Angels. Many 40k lore fans are not aware that the Fallen are not just Dark Angels who sided with Luther on Caliban after the heresy. A lot of them are misled Marines who were scattered throughout space and time during the destruction of Caliban. For some Fallen in the 41st millennium, they've only just materialised from the closing years of the heresy, while others are truly ancient, having evaded Ravenwing hunting parties for millennia. There are those among this number who have wholeheartedly thrown their lot in with the Dark Pantheon, content to follow Chaos Lords, while Luther himself was imprisoned by the Dark Angels chapter. Others forged their own warbands, uniting with others of their kind, and more still, did their best to not draw attention to themselves, choosing to not make themselves known to the Imperium they betrayed, but also to not side with any of the traitor legions. I can't wait to hear more about the Fallen now Luther's broken free and the Lion has awoken. Thanks so much for tuning in, especially if you've made it this far. Let me know your favourite Renegade chapter or warband and how you think the appearance of the Cicatrix is affecting them currently. Take it easy, have a good one.